Good day. My name is Rossouw and with me today is Rossouw and Rota. We are from Imperial, that many people in South Africa would recognize as the leading logistics company. But I think what is quite important is for us to start off by reiterating that our purpose as Imperial is to connect Africa and the world and providing people with access to quality products and services. That speaks to the fact that Imperial is much more than a company that just moves, store and deliver product. We actually manage end-to-end value chains for many companies across the African continent and making sure that people out there are able to access those products and services that will make their lives better. And importantly, underpinning to all of that, as I said, connecting Africa and the world. It's our privilege to be part of this largely academic event, but what we would like to do today is actually provide a commercial side to speak to the commercial consequence that is necessary to make road freight sustainable. And it's not only an academic topic, it's real for us. And Lauren, maybe you can start by just giving us some context around where emissions fit into the broader world, but also then in the road freight environment.
Thanks, Quibus, and hello everyone. So Professor Alan McKinnon has done some quantifications on the logistics sector, and for the manufacturing supply chain, the transport of raw materials, finished and intermediate goods contributes around 9% of global emissions, and warehousing and terminals another 1 to 2%, so 11% in total. And if we think about companies looking to reduce emissions throughout their supply chain, transport is one of the priority sectors they look at, because it doesn't necessarily impact on their product design or their sourcing. We're going to take you through some internal and external factors which place pressure on creating increasingly sustainable supply chains. I'm going to start firstly, Quibus, with the license to operate. And that touches on two elements. One is the regulatory and the other is the social license to operate. I think we're all quite aware that there is a rapidly changing policy context, and that globally, under the banner of the UNFCCC, we have the Paris Agreement, which at a global level sets an ambition that is being in turn cascaded to country level and in turn to sectoral level, including our own sector, logistics. And that then creates a pressure on regulators to develop standards and limitations on emissions, which is a very important driver for a company to maintain their license to operate. On the social front, we also find a number of stakeholders applying pressure. I don't think I need to talk about how tangible climate change is really becoming. It's not this distant future event. We are seeing wildfires, we're seeing floods and heat waves, and this is creating growing societal expectation, not only on regulators, but also on companies to improve, to move the dial in terms of getting us closer to that 1.5 degrees by 2050. In terms of investors, another very important stakeholder group for a company, we're seeing increasing pressure on them to do due diligence from an environmental, social, and governance, or ESG perspective, and make sure that they are not being negligent in the companies they invest in. So in turn, we're starting to see ESG ratings growing in prominence, and this call for globally harmonized indicators so that we can transparently compare apple for apple when we look at different companies to see whether their performance is living up to what they say. Customers, also a very important stakeholder group for a company like ours. These may be later to come to the party, but now they are putting a lot of pressure, scrutinizing their supply chains to understand what is the emissions performance of my suppliers. And they're calling for increased quantification and disclosure, which ultimately helps them in turn form their sourcing decisions. Very importantly, I think companies mustn't be reactive. Companies need to, at the most senior level, provide proper oversight on the roadmaps they are implementing to transition to a low carbon future, making capital available, doing testing on technologies, because what works for one company doesn't necessarily work for another company and in the markets that you operate, such as ours being largely across Africa. One needs to ensure that you have the right technology decisions to roll out when the time comes. Kobus, on that note, perhaps you can provide some pointers as to why sustainable road freight offerings are so important for our growth in terms of revenue.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I think in addition to the regulatory framework and the license to operate, what we're seeing is that for companies to entrust us with moving their product, it has to become much more than just a low-cost transport option. It has to be a sustainable offering, and that goes to the quality of our service. So it is increasingly important and viable for us to be a sustainable road freight operator. Now that speaks to safety, it speaks to responsibility in what we do, but it also speaks to emissions. And specifically understanding as companies evolve from carbon neutral to net zero, our emissions as part of their scope 3 is part of what they need to measure. So it's not theoretical, it's not academic. The simple reality is that the way we manage emissions is part of our clients who entrust us to actually outsource product to us. So I think I think up till now, with people or companies focusing on parts of this, but it being less tangible, it's always been a good idea. It's now real. It's real that our growth, our revenue is dependent on how good we are in terms of actually implementing sustainable road freight. I do think, Lauren, though, that we have to recognize that this is good anyway. This is also about saving costs.
Yes.
It's not just about saving the planet, and that we can certainly speak to how we can drive efficiency through responsible, sustainable road freight. And maybe you can add some more perspectives to that.
Sure, thanks, Kobus. I like to think that there's really a continuum of climate change mitigation technologies for the sector, and certainly Imperial is looking across the board at that continuum. On the low-hanging fruit side, we really look at fuel and energy efficiency, and these kind of investments typically have a payback period of less than 3 years. So for example, in our warehouses, we've looked at energy efficient lighting and refrigeration. We've implemented turbine vents in our warehouses, and these kind of initiatives, coupled with the rollout of solar technology on the warehouses, can very easily save more than 5 to 10% of our energy costs. On the fuel efficiency side, I think we'll touch on some of these points later, but certainly on the low-hanging fruit side, looking at strict maintenance regimes and replacing our vehicles according to a defined schedule, has really helped us to save in the region of 5% on our fuel costs over the past couple of years. Coupled with that is driver training. I think we mustn't underestimate the benefit of training drivers to understand how driving at optimal speeds, not braking harshly and not idling excessively, make a contribution towards that outcome. Then, as you move higher up the continuum of technologies, we can achieve even bigger environmental improvements, but requiring bigger capital investments and sometimes with much longer payback periods. And I think the transition to those new technologies that may not be yet fully commercialized have some barriers. And that might be because they're not yet fully tested. Perhaps in the markets we're operating in, the infrastructure isn't yet in place to allow them to be deployed at large scale. And of course, we need to understand whether we will get a financial return to recoup that investment from the clients that we work with. And therefore, on the transport side, I think some of these technologies in our markets are still nascent and need a lot more focus, because we do acknowledge they can deliver significant cost savings. As you've said, Kobus, they can help us to grow our revenues, but yet we face the challenge that the change is not as simple as it looks. Kobus, maybe you can take us through a little bit of the thoughts on how commercial relationships and partnerships can help us to unlock these challenges.
Yeah, I think that's very important to understand, is that this makes sense. It makes sense, as you said. We've said that we can grow revenue or sustain revenue. We can even reduce costs. But the things that get in the way is that the way we are contracted, the way we engage with our clients, has to change. And probably the first thing that has to change is that this is a long-term game. And just providing transport on a spot basis or even a one-year contract basis is not going to make it fly. We have to invest in skills, as you say, in driver training, in new technologies. And if we don't get the opportunity to work on longer term partnerships with our clients, again, it is very difficult to make this work. But in addition to the term of contract, and whether that's how we sell or even how we buy fuel, we also have to change some of the commercial realities. And typically, and I think most buyers of transport would know that the sort of easy traditional way to just look at the percentage of total transport cost being diesel that is always used to adjust for statutory price changes is just not good enough anymore. We have to get more sophisticated in the way that we price transportation or road freight, that it takes into account the true cost drivers and therefore rewards changes that are made to reduce either fuel consumption but also emissions, and whether that's total emissions or sulfur emissions. We have to change, we have to have an open mind between ourselves and our partner clients, that we actually make the rands and cents account differently to be able to drive behavior. Because if we don't do that, this again becomes an idea that does not get traction because it does not actually hit the short-term impact on the business. I think this, maybe to take the partnership concept a bit further, can you talk to other partnerships, so other than how we engage with our clients, of what you've seen as important for Imperial to engage on this?
Absolutely. I think it's in the spirit of Sustainable Development Goal 17 that we realize partnering and collaborating are very important to overcoming some of the uncertainties and the complexities of moving towards these technologies that aren't widely deployed in our markets of operation. So Cobus, I think there's two types of partnerships that I would really like to highlight to the audience. The first one being partnerships on alternative technologies. In these cases, we are working with clients where the client brings an alternative fuel to the table. So they're typically in the energy sector. We then invest in a truck that supports that fuel. So typically we're looking at liquefied natural gas, compressed natural gas, gray and green hydrogen. And then we partner through a pricing mechanism where we run the truck carrying one of their products to their customers on a defined route. And the benefit of that is that, number one, we're both getting the visibility about being progressive on the change, and number two, we get to see whether the piloting on that specific route for that specific product is working from a technology, a safety and a pricing perspective. And once we've done that, the benefit is then we can upscale to more products and more routes for their customer. So it's a really wonderful way to partner together. The second type of partnership is more from a policy advocacy perspective, where harnessing collective knowledge with working with other companies through our business associations, we can help define a transition roadmap for the country. And that helps us to outline and define what are some of the key challenges we face, what are the key requirements that need to be in place to sustainably allow that transition, and also importantly, what are the schedules or the timeframes over which that transition can happen. And I think that is really working well to help in the South African context, in particular, our sector, to define what is the roadmap that will bring us to that net zero future in a sustainable manner. Cobus, on that note, I think maybe we should end up the discussion with some digital technology information on what are we doing in that space that also helps ease this transition.
Yeah, cool. I think that adds so much of even more excitement to the opportunity. I think we've said that this is important from a license to operate point of view. It's important from revenue from a cost, partnership, clients. But the beauty of the digital world around us is it actually allows us to take a very different approach to emissions. And I can keep you going for another half an hour on this, but essentially what we've done in Imperial over the last year is that we've taken a big data approach using vehicle data, using fuel fill data, and using activity data, typically of our people and our vehicles, and combined all of this big data into a data lake and applied some really, really smart data science to this. And you can pull out all the other words of machine learning and algorithms and etc. But the point is, what we were able to do and are able to do is to apply a lean manufacturing approach to diesel consumption. Now, what that means is that we are able to look at the detail level of consumption, not at a home base to home base level only, which is normally the way diesel is measured, because that's the activity from a full trunk to a full tank. You can measure the consumption. But if you look at this at a segment level, so at a piece of road in a specific direction, and you measure not only the averages or the totals, but actually the standard deviation, you can measure waste. And that allows us to see at a very detailed level what is actually happening with fuel consumption. And therefore, there's opportunities everywhere, as there is in lean manufacturing, to remove this waste. And the beauty of this is it's taking a proven approach that works in manufacturing, has worked in manufacturing for a long time, and applies that in another production environment, the production of road freight. But then makes it possible for us to use data to see the unseen, to actually see out there across thousands of drivers, thousands of trucks, and millions of kilometers, and clearly millions of liters of diesel, what's happening and what we could do to change that. I think combining that digital insights and actually helping us drive the commercial consequence of diesel consumption, linking it to driver behavior, linking it to the maintainability of a vehicle or the type of vehicle, allows us to make much better decisions based on actual data insights around consumption, rather than trying to deal with this only as a holistic part. And we truly believe that this sort of thinking and application of digital interventions or digital advancements makes it possible for us to differentiate ourselves, to partner with our clients, but actually at the end of the day to do that because we are on the one side reducing cost, but we're also reducing emissions. And that's clearly important for us as a business, again, for us to drive growth, for our own license to operate. And on top of that, it's really just exciting to see how all of this comes together to benefit an industry like ours.
Great. On that note, I think maybe just to wrap up the discussion, just to repeat the 6 drivers from an internal and external perspective that we've discussed, is a rapidly changing policy and regulatory context, pressures on our social license to operate from a variety of our key stakeholders, client expectations for a green supply chain, saving on increasingly expensive energy resources, including both fuel and electricity, harnessing fleet digitalization to identify ongoing improvement opportunities through the data that brings to the fore, and last but not least, the openness of our partners to working together in a greener industrial ecosystem to deliver improvements through shared costs and revenue models.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.